I'm Amelia Brooklyn, 47 years old, and I built a multi-million-dollar sustainable packaging company from my garage, only to watch my business partner try to steal it from under me. But what Dave didn't know when he orchestrated his corporate coup was that I owned 51% of the company he was trying to take. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted in business, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this kind of professional backstabbing. My journey into sustainable packaging started 22 years ago when I was a chemical engineer at DuPont, watching tons of plastic waste pile up in our testing facility. Every lunch break, I'd walk past the dumpsters overflowing with prototype containers that would take centuries to decompose, and something inside me just broke. My mentor, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, noticed my frustration during one of our quarterly reviews. She was this brilliant woman in her 60s who'd survived decades in male-dominated chemical engineering, and she told me something I'll never forget. Amelia, if you see a problem this clearly, you have two choices: complain about it for the rest of your career, or become the solution. That conversation happened on a Tuesday afternoon in her corner office overlooking the Delaware River, and I remember the way the autumn light filtered through her spider plant as she handed me a stack of research papers on biodegradable polymers. "Start here," she said, "but don't do it on company time." For the next 3 years, I spent every evening and weekend in my garage, which I'd converted into a makeshift laboratory. The smell of acetone and heated plastics became as familiar as coffee. My husband David would bring me sandwiches at midnight, finding me hunched over bubbling beakers and scattered molecular diagrams. I was developing a revolutionary bio-based polymer that could replace traditional plastic packaging while decomposing completely within 90 days in industrial compost facilities. The breakthrough came during a particularly brutal winter when I accidentally left a prototype sample near my garage heater. Instead of melting uniformly like previous attempts, it maintained structural integrity while developing microscopic pores that would accelerate decomposition. I called David at work, screaming into the phone about polymer crystallization rates, until he reminded me he was an accountant, not a chemist. My first real break came when I presented my research at the American Chemical Society's annual conference in Denver. I was terrified, standing at that poster session in a sea of mostly male researchers, but Dr. Rodriguez had taught me to lead with confidence. A venture capitalist named Janet Morrison stopped by my poster around 3 in the afternoon, right when I was considering packing up early. She spent 40 minutes asking detailed questions about scalability and manufacturing costs, then handed me her card with a handwritten note on the back. "Call me Monday. This could change everything." That phone call led to my first patent application and a small seed funding round that let me quit DuPont and rent actual laboratory space in a converted warehouse in Wilmington. The golden period of my career started when I hired Dave Webb as my business development partner. He was 39, charming, and had an MBA from Wharton, along with connections throughout the consumer goods industry. We met at a sustainable business conference where he approached me after my keynote on circular economy principles. Dave had this way of making you feel like the smartest person in the room, while simultaneously offering practical solutions to problems you didn't even know you had. He understood market dynamics in ways that complemented my technical expertise perfectly. Within 6 months of joining as a co-founder, he'd secured our first major client, a regional grocery chain wanting to transition their deli containers to sustainable alternatives. Our company, BioCycle Innovations, grew from 3 employees to 47 in just 4 years. We moved from the converted warehouse to a sleek facility in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, complete with R&D labs, manufacturing space, and offices overlooking the Delaware River. I remember the day we signed our lease, standing in what would become my corner office, watching cargo ships navigate the river while Dave calculated potential square footage for expansion. He was always thinking bigger picture, pushing me to consider markets I hadn't imagined. When Whole Foods Regional approached us about supplying packaging for their prepared foods division, Dave negotiated a 3-year contract worth $12 million. I trusted him completely with business operations while I focused on product development and manufacturing optimization. The awards started coming in our 5th year. We won the EPA's Green Chemistry Challenge Award for our innovative polymer technology. I was named one of Philadelphia Business Journal's 40 Under 40 Innovators, even though I was technically 43. Dave insisted we hire a PR firm to leverage the recognition, and soon I was giving interviews to sustainability magazines and speaking at conferences across the country. Our revenue hit $28 million, with projected growth to $50 million within 2 years. I felt invincible, like every calculated risk and sleepless night had finally paid off. Dave would joke during team meetings that we were building the Tesla of packaging, revolutionizing an industry that hadn't innovated in decades. But success brought new challenges. We were fielding acquisition offers from major corporations, and Dave started attending more conferences without me, claiming he was exploring strategic partnerships. I noticed subtle changes in office dynamics. Conversations would stop when I walked into rooms. Dave began scheduling key client meetings when I was traveling for conferences, then briefing me afterward with summaries instead of including me directly. He hired new senior staff without consulting me first, people who seemed more loyal to him than to our shared vision. When I questioned him about a new VP of operations he'd brought in, Dave laughed it off, saying I was too focused on technical details to appreciate business necessities. The morning everything changed started like any other Wednesday. I arrived at the office at 7:30, stopping by our small kit Brooklyn to make coffee using the industrial espresso machine Dave had insisted we lease. The familiar hum of the manufacturing floor below and the scent of freshly printed lab reports usually energized me, but something felt different. My assistant Kelly avoided eye contact when I said good morning, and there were more cars in the parking lot than usual for such an early hour. I checked my calendar and noticed a 9 a.m. board meeting that hadn't been there the day before. When I asked Kelly about it, she stammered something about Dave scheduling it last minute and rushed away to the supply closet. The depth of my professional development had been shaped by understanding that innovation required both scientific rigor and business acumen. Throughout my early career at DuPont, I'd witnessed brilliant researchers whose discoveries never made it to market because they couldn't navigate corporate politics. Dr. Rodriguez had taught me that technical excellence meant nothing without strategic thinking. When I started BioCycle Innovations, I was determined to build a company culture that valued both innovation and integrity. Our early team meetings happened around a folding table in the warehouse, where everyone from lab technicians to our part-time bookkeeper had equal voice in problem solving. Our company culture had evolved organically around what I called transparent collaboration. Every month we held all-hands meetings where I shared financial updates, upcoming challenges, and celebrated individual contributions. I instituted an open-door policy where any employee could schedule time with me to discuss concerns or ideas. When our lead chemist, Tom Martinez, suggested modifications to our polymer formula that could reduce costs by 15%, I made sure he received both public recognition and a bonus that reflected the value of his contribution. Dave initially supported these practices, often praising my leadership style to potential investors as evidence of our strong company culture. However, I began noticing patterns that concerned me. Dave would schedule client dinners or investor meetings during our all-hands sessions, claiming that business development couldn't wait for internal meetings. He started referring to our transparency practices as inefficient and suggested we adopt more streamlined decision-making processes. When I pushed back, he'd frame his concerns around scaling challenges, arguing that successful companies required clear hierarchies and confidential strategic planning. Looking back, I realized he was systematically undermining the collaborative culture I'd worked so hard to establish. My professional support system had always centered around mentorship and genuine partnerships. Dr. Rodriguez remained an informal advisor even after I left DuPont, and I'd built relationships with other women entrepreneurs through organizations like the Female Founder Collective. My friendship with Janet Morrison, the venture capitalist who'd first believed in my research, evolved into a trusted advisory relationship where she provided both business guidance and emotional support during challenging periods. These relationships were built on mutual respect and shared values, not just transactional networking. The crisis began during what should have been a celebration. We just received confirmation that our new polymer formulation had passed all FDA safety requirements for food contact applications, clearing the way for expansion into restaurant and food service markets. I'd spent 3 months working with our regulatory consultant to navigate the approval process, staying late every night to compile testing data and documentation. The approval letter arrived on a Friday afternoon, and I immediately called Dave to share the news. His response was strangely muted, congratulating me but quickly shifting the conversation to a board meeting he wanted to schedule for the following week. The weekend felt odd. Dave didn't return my texts about celebrating with the team or planning our market expansion strategy. On Monday morning, I arrived to find him in his office with two men in expensive suits who he introduced as consultants, reviewing our operational efficiency. They had laptops open displaying financial spreadsheets and organizational charts I'd never seen before. When I asked to join their discussion, Dave said it was a preliminary assessment and he'd brief me later. The dismissal felt like a slap, especially given that I was supposedly his equal partner in building this company. That afternoon, Dave requested a private meeting in our conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manufacturing floor. He sat across from me with a folder of documents and an expression I'd never seen before, cold and calculating. "Amelia, we need to discuss the future direction of BioCycle," he began, using the formal tone he reserved for difficult client negotiations. He laid out what he called a restructuring proposal that would transition me from CEO to Chief Technology Officer, focusing solely on research and development while he assumed full operational control. The proposal included a detailed organizational chart where I reported to him, along with revised equity arrangements that would better reflect current contributions to company growth. I stared at the documents, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. This was my company, built from my research, my vision, my years of sleepless nights in a garage laboratory. Dave continued talking about maximizing shareholder value and leveraging operational expertise, but his words sounded muffled, like I was underwater. When I finally found my voice, I asked him directly, "Are you trying to push me out of my own company?" His response was measured and rehearsed. "I'm trying to position BioCycle for the next level of growth, which requires difficult decisions about leadership structure." That's when I realized this wasn't a spontaneous restructuring proposal. This was a calculated coup. The first scene of rising conflict began with corporate gaslighting disguised as strategic planning. Dave scheduled a formal board meeting for the following Thursday, inviting our three external board members, Janet Morrison, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, and Michael Brooklyn, an operations expert we'd added when we raised our Series A funding. The meeting was held in our main conference room, with Dave positioned at the head of the table and a professionally prepared presentation loaded on the wall-mounted screen. He'd arranged the seating so that I was isolated at the far end, physically separated from our board members who were clustered around his end of the table. Dave began with a polished presentation titled BioCycle Innovations, Operational Optimization for Scale, filled with charts and graphs I'd never seen before. He spoke fluently about market penetration rates, operational inefficiencies, and leadership bandwidth limitations. The presentation painted a picture of a company held back by founder-centric decision-making and technical leadership gaps in commercial execution. Every slide seemed designed to subtly undermine my contributions, while positioning him as the solution to problems I didn't even know existed. When he reached the slide labeled Proposed Leadership Transition, my heart started racing. The corporate speak was masterful in its manipulation. Dave used phrases like right-sizing leadership roles and optimizing core competencies to describe what was essentially my demotion. He talked about my invaluable technical expertise while arguing that commercial leadership requires different skill sets. When Janet Morrison asked direct questions about my role in the proposed structure, Dave responded with carefully crafted language about maximizing Amelia's impact in areas where she excels, while ensuring operational efficiency at the executive level. The presentation concluded with projected revenue growth under the new structure, suggesting that removing me from operational leadership would somehow triple our profits within 18 months. As the meeting progressed, I realized I needed to start documenting everything. I discreetly opened my phone's voice recording app under the table and began taking detailed notes about specific quotes and timeline claims. Dave's confidence suggested this wasn't his first conversation with board members about my role. When Dr. Rodriguez asked about my perspective on the proposed changes, Dave smoothly interjected that we'd had several productive discussions about transitioning to roles that better leverage our respective strengths. That was a complete lie, and the casual way he said it made me understand that truth was negotiable in his version of events. The meeting ended with a request for board members to consider the proposal before our next quarterly meeting, giving Dave 3 weeks to solidify support for his takeover. The second scene involved systematic isolation that started immediately after the board meeting. Within days, I discovered that Dave had changed passwords to several key systems, claiming it was part of a security upgrade that IT would brief me on later. My access to our customer relationship management system was restricted to read-only, preventing me from contacting clients directly or updating project status reports. When I confronted our IT manager, Dave Kim, he apologized profusely but explained that Dave had ordered the changes as part of a phased security implementation that would be completed within 2 weeks. Email chains that I'd been included in for years suddenly stopped including me. I'd discover important client communications by accident when someone forgot to remove me from a thread, or when information came up in casual conversations with lab staff. Dave began scheduling key client meetings during times when I was committed to conference presentations or regulatory meetings that I couldn't reschedule. When I asked to join client calls remotely, he'd say the timing wasn't convenient or that his agenda was focused on operational details that didn't require technical input. The message was clear. I was being removed from business relationships I'd helped build. The isolation extended to my own team members. Employees who'd previously approached me directly with questions or concerns began directing everything through Dave's office. During our weekly lab meetings, conversations would die when I walked in, replaced by awkward small talk about weekend plans or office supplies. My longtime collaborator, Tom Martinez, admitted during a private conversation that he'd been advised to route all technical decisions through Dave for better coordination with business objectives. The systematic exclusion was creating exactly the operational inefficiencies that Dave was supposedly trying to eliminate, but it was also building a paper trail that positioned me as disconnected from day-to-day operations. The impact on my work quality was immediate and devastating. Without access to current client specifications and project timelines, I couldn't prioritize research effectively or allocate lab resources appropriately. A major client presentation that I'd been preparing for months was suddenly reassigned to Dave's new VP of Operations, who lacked the technical background to explain our polymer technology accurately. When the client expressed concerns about technical details during the presentation, Dave blamed my communication gaps for their confusion. The setup was becoming clear: create conditions where I couldn't succeed, then use those failures as justification for my removal. During this period, I began documenting everything meticulously. I printed email chains before my access was restricted, saved voice recordings of key conversations, and maintained a detailed timeline of changes to my responsibilities and system access. I also started reaching out quietly to allies outside the company, including Dr. Rodriguez and other industry contacts, who could provide objective perspective on what was happening. The evidence I was gathering painted a clear picture of deliberate sabotage, but I needed to be strategic about when and how to use it. The third scene escalated when Dave began manufacturing grounds for termination through impossible performance standards. He scheduled a formal performance review meeting, presenting a newly created evaluation framework that measured my contributions against metrics I'd never seen before. The criteria focused heavily on commercial impact and operational leadership, while minimizing the technical innovations that had built our company's competitive advantage. According to his assessment, my performance had declined significantly over the past year despite our record revenue growth and successful FDA approvals. The trap was carefully constructed through resource constraints and timeline manipulation. Dave assigned me responsibility for developing 3 new polymer formulations simultaneously, each with deadlines that would require twice our current lab capacity to meet. When I requested additional staff or extended timelines, he pointed to budget constraints and client commitments that made accommodations impossible. He documented every request I made for additional resources, creating a paper trail that portrayed me as demanding and unrealistic about operational limitations. The performance improvement plan he presented was designed to fail. It required me to achieve specific milestones in polymer development, while simultaneously reducing lab costs by 25% and improving production efficiency metrics that were primarily controlled by manufacturing processes outside my direct authority. The plan included weekly check-ins, where Dave would evaluate my progress against these impossible standards, with explicit language about termination if improvements weren't achieved within 90 days. Every conversation was documented and copied to HR, creating an official record of my alleged performance deficiencies. During this period, I consulted with an employment attorney who specialized in founder disputes and corporate governance. She reviewed the performance improvement plan and immediately identified it as a pretext for wrongful termination. Her analysis revealed that the evaluation criteria were inconsistent with my actual job responsibilities, and that the timeline for improvement was unreasonably short for the scope of work assigned. She advised me to continue documenting everything, while she researched the specific terms of our corporate governance documents and equity arrangements. The legal consultation revealed something crucial: that I'd overlooked in my focus on defending my technical contributions, the importance of understanding my actual ownership position in the company. My attorney requested copies of all corporate filings, equity distribution documents, and board resolutions from our formation through our most recent funding rounds. She explained that founder disputes often came down to voting control, and that Dave's confidence suggested he believed he had the power to remove me from leadership. As she reviewed our documents, her expression shifted from concern to surprise, then to something approaching excitement. The fourth scene brought everything to a head with Dave's ultimatum, delivered during what he called a final discussion about your future at BioCycle. He requested the meeting for a Friday afternoon, scheduling it after most employees had left for the weekend. The setting was deliberately intimidating. He'd arranged for our corporate attorney to attend, along with the new VP of Operations, who barely knew our technology, but seemed fully aligned with Dave's vision for the company's direction. Dave presented a resignation package that was generous enough to seem reasonable, while being structured to ensure my permanent separation from the company. The offer included 18 months of salary continuation, full health insurance coverage, and a consulting agreement that would pay me for technical advice on existing projects. However, the package came with comprehensive non-compete and non-disclosure agreements that would prevent me from working in sustainable packaging for 3 years and require my silence about internal company matters indefinitely. The clear message was that I could leave quietly with financial compensation or face termination and potential legal battles that would destroy my professional reputation. The threats were delivered with corporate precision. Dave explained that rejecting the package would force them to proceed with termination for performance deficiencies, which would include negative references that would make finding comparable employment extremely difficult. He mentioned conversations he'd had with industry contacts who were concerned about my leadership challenges and suggested that my reputation was already damaged among potential employers. The corporate attorney nodded approvingly as Dave outlined the legal protections the company had in place, making it clear that fighting back would be expensive and likely unsuccessful. The pressure tactics included a tight deadline for my decision. Dave wanted my answer by Monday morning, giving me only the weekend to consider a choice that would determine my professional future. He framed the urgency as necessary for business continuity and mentioned client relationships that needed immediate clarification about company leadership. The implicit message was that delays would create additional problems that would make the offered package less generous and the alternative consequences more severe. But Dave had made a critical miscalculation. During his presentation, I kept thinking about my recent conversation with my attorney and the documents she'd been reviewing. As he outlined the voting procedures that would finalize my removal from the board and leadership team, I realized he was operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about corporate control. His confidence suggested he believed he had the votes necessary to remove me, but my attorney's preliminary analysis had revealed discrepancies in our equity documentation that might change everything. As the meeting concluded, I asked for clarification about the voting process for leadership changes. Dave explained that board decisions required a simple majority and that my removal had sufficient support to proceed. He seemed pleased to explain the mechanics of my defeat, detailing conversations he'd had with board members and the timeline for implementing the transition. His thorough explanation revealed the extent of his planning while also providing crucial information about his strategy. What he didn't know was that I was recording the conversation and that my attorney was preparing documentation that could fundamentally alter the balance of power he thought he controlled. The climax confrontation took place the following Tuesday in our main conference room, with all board members present along with both corporate attorneys. I'd spent the weekend preparing with my legal counsel, reviewing every document related to our company's formation and equity distribution. The meeting began with Dave confidently presenting his timeline for leadership transition, treating my resignation as a foregone conclusion. He'd prepared detailed transition plans, client communication strategies, and organizational charts that removed me from all operational authority. The corporate setting amplified the tension. Dave sat at the head of the polished conference table, flanked by his attorney and the new VP of Operations. Our board members, Janet Morrison, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, and Michael Brooklyn, occupied the center positions, with official documents and voting forms arranged in front of them. The wall-mounted screen displayed Dave's presentation slides about BioCycle's next phase of growth, complete with projected revenue targets and expansion timelines that assumed my departure. The lighting was harsh fluorescent, making everyone look pale and tired, while the hum of the HVAC system provided an ominous background soundtrack. Dave opened with a polished presentation that framed my resignation as a mutual decision based on evolving company needs. He spoke about my valuable contributions during our startup phase, while emphasizing the need for commercial leadership to guide our scaling efforts. The language was carefully crafted to sound respectful, while systematically undermining my ongoing value to the organization. He presented financial projections showing accelerated growth under new leadership, client testimonials about operational improvements, and detailed transition plans that would ensure continuity of our technical capabilities under his guidance. The board members' initial reactions were mixed but seemed to favor Dave's position. Michael Brooklyn asked practical questions about client relationships and operational continuity that Dave answered with impressive detail. Janet Morrison expressed concern about my departure but acknowledged the financial projections Dave had presented. Even Dr. Rodriguez, who had been my mentor and strongest supporter, seemed resigned to the inevitability of the transition. The dynamic in the room suggested that Dave had done his homework and secured the support he needed to formalize my removal. But then I stood up and asked to present information that the board should consider before making any final decisions. Dave's expression shifted from confidence to irritation as I moved to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the presentation system. My attorney, who had been quietly observing from the corner, moved to a position where she could assist if needed. The atmosphere in the room became tense as I began speaking, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I started with a simple statement that cut through all of Dave's corporate rhetoric. Before this board votes on any leadership changes, you need to understand the actual equity distribution of BioCycle Innovations. I displayed a document that my attorney had meticulously reconstructed from corporate filings, showing the precise ownership percentages based on all stock issuances, option grants, and equity adjustments since our company's formation. The numbers on the screen told a story that contradicted everything Dave had assumed about his ability to control the company. The smoking gun was revealed in a single slide that showed my actual ownership stake, 51% of BioCycle Innovations. Dave's face went white as he stared at the documentation, clearly seeing numbers that contradicted his understanding of our equity structure. The room fell silent as board members processed the implications of what they were seeing. My attorney had discovered that several early stock transactions had been incorrectly recorded in company documents, and when properly calculated, my founder's shares combined with equity from our first funding round gave me controlling interest in the company. Dave began stammering objections about the accuracy of the calculations, but my attorney was ready with supporting documentation. She presented signed stock certificates, board resolutions, and transaction records that proved my ownership stake beyond any doubt. The evidence was irrefutable, backed by official corporate filings and legal documents that Dave himself had signed during our various funding rounds. His carefully planned coup was crumbling as the fundamental assumption underlying his strategy, that he could outvote me, proved to be completely wrong. The revelation created immediate chaos in the room. Dave's attorney began frantically reviewing documents, while Michael Brooklyn asked pointed questions about how such a significant discrepancy could have gone unnoticed for so long. Janet Morrison looked stunned, realizing that she'd been prepared to vote on removing a CEO who actually controlled the majority of company stock. Dr. Rodriguez broke into a slow smile as she understood that her former student had not only survived an attempted corporate takeover, but held the ultimate trump card. The corporate panic was palpable as Dave realized his position had shifted from predator to prey. His polished presentation about company leadership became irrelevant when the person he was trying to remove actually owned controlling interest. The financial projections, client testimonials, and transition plans that had seemed so compelling minutes earlier now appeared to be elaborate fantasies built on a fundamental misunderstanding of corporate power structures. Dave tried to salvage the situation by arguing about operational efficiency and business expertise, but his credibility was shattered by the revelation that he'd orchestrated an entire takeover attempt without understanding basic facts about company ownership. I concluded my presentation with a simple statement that established my authority. As the majority shareholder of BioCycle Innovations, I'm rejecting any proposed leadership changes and directing this board to address the attempted usurpation of authority that we've all witnessed. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dave's attempted coup hadn't just failed, it had exposed him as either incompetent for not understanding basic corporate structure or malicious for attempting to steal a company through deception and manipulation. The immediate aftermath was swift and decisive. Dave announced his resignation during that same meeting, claiming he wanted to pursue other opportunities rather than face the humiliation of being terminated by the CEO he'd tried to depose. His attorney advised him to tender his resignation immediately to avoid potential legal action for breach of fiduciary duty and attempted corporate theft. The new VP of Operations, who'd been hired as part of Dave's scheme, also submitted his resignation when it became clear that his position was based on fraudulent premises. Walking out of that conference room felt like emerging from a nightmare into brilliant sunlight. Employees who'd been watching nervously through the glass walls could see from my expression that the threat to our company had been eliminated. Kelly, my assistant, started crying with relief when I told her that Dave was gone and that BioCycle would continue under my leadership. The manufacturing floor erupted in applause when Tom Martinez announced that I'd retained control of the company we'd all built together. The industry reaction was swift and largely supportive. Word spread quickly through professional networks about Dave's failed takeover attempt, with many people expressing shock at his tactics and admiration for my successful defense of the company. Several competitors reached out with congratulations, and I received invitations to speak at conferences about corporate governance and founder protection. The story became a cautionary tale in business schools about the importance of understanding equity structures and the dangers of underestimating founders who'd built companies from the ground up. Media attention was intense but manageable. Trade publications covered the story as an example of founder resilience and proper corporate governance. I gave selective interviews to sustainability magazines and business journals, focusing on lessons learned about protecting company culture and maintaining control of your vision. The coverage helped establish my reputation as a leader who could defend her company against internal threats, while continuing to drive innovation in sustainable packaging. The legal resolution involved significant settlements and carefully negotiated non-disclosure agreements. Dave agreed to a comprehensive non-compete clause that prevented him from working in sustainable packaging for 5 years, along with financial compensation for the company to cover costs associated with his attempted takeover. Our corporate attorney recommended strengthening board governance procedures and equity documentation to prevent similar situations in the future. The months following Dave's departure brought unprecedented growth and stability to BioCycle Innovations. Without the internal conflict and sabotage, our team could focus entirely on innovation and client service. We closed 3 major contracts that Dave had jeopardized through his power grab, including a partnership with a national restaurant chain that wanted to transition all their takeout containers to our biodegradable alternatives. Revenue increased by 40% in the first quarter after his departure, validating the board's decision to support my continued leadership. I used the experience to strengthen our company culture around transparency and shared ownership. We implemented new policies that gave all employees equity stakes in the company's success, ensuring that future growth would benefit everyone who contributed to our mission. The attempted coup taught me the importance of clear governance structures and the value of maintaining strong relationships with board members and external advisors who could provide objective perspective during crises. Trust rebuilding was a gradual process that required consistent actions over time. I scheduled individual meetings with every employee to address concerns about company stability and future direction. Many team members admitted they'd felt pressured to choose sides during the conflict, and I worked to rebuild an environment where people felt safe expressing concerns or disagreements without fear of retaliation. The experience made me a more vigilant leader, while also demonstrating the strength of the company culture we'd built together. Professional opportunities expanded as my reputation for principled leadership spread throughout the industry. I was invited to join the boards of several sustainability organizations and asked to mentor other women entrepreneurs facing similar challenges. The visibility led to speaking engagements at major conferences where I could share lessons about corporate governance, founder protection, and building resilient company cultures. These platforms allowed me to advocate for better legal protections for founders and more transparent equity structures in startup environments. New partnerships emerged from the credibility I'd gained through successfully defending my company. Several major corporations reached out about collaboration opportunities, recognizing BioCycle as a stable and well-managed organization that could deliver on long-term commitments. We signed exclusive licensing agreements for our polymer technology with companies in Europe and Asia, expanding our global reach while maintaining control of our core intellectual property. A year later, BioCycle Innovations had grown to over 60 employees and achieved our first profitable quarter. We'd opened a second manufacturing facility and expanded our product line to include compostable films and rigid containers for industrial applications. The attempted takeover that could have destroyed our company had instead strengthened our foundation and accelerated our growth trajectory. Dave's departure eliminated the internal conflicts that had been draining energy and resources, allowing us to focus entirely on innovation and customer service. Industry recognition continued with awards for both technical innovation and business leadership. Our new polymer formulations received multiple patents, and BioCycle was named Sustainable Packaging Company of the Year by Environmental Leader magazine. I was selected for Forbes' 50 over 50 inches list, highlighting leaders who'd achieved significant success in the second half of their careers. The recognition helped establish BioCycle as a thought leader in sustainable packaging, while validating my decision to fight for control of the company I'd built. Company culture evolved to become even more collaborative and transparent than before. We instituted monthly all-hands meetings where financial performance, client relationships, and strategic decisions were shared with every employee. Our open equity policy meant that any employee could review company ownership structures and understand exactly how their contributions would be rewarded through profit sharing and equity grants. The contrast with Dave's secretive approach was dramatic and intentional. Reflecting on the experience 18 months later, I've learned crucial lessons about protecting both your intellectual property and your corporate authority. The most important insight is that technical brilliance means nothing without understanding the legal and financial structures that govern your company. I'd been so focused on developing innovative products that I'd neglected to stay current on our evolving equity arrangements and board governance procedures. That oversight nearly cost me control of the company I'd spent decades building. Professional relationships require constant attention and authentic communication. Dave succeeded initially because he appeared to share my values while systematically undermining the collaborative culture I'd worked to establish. The warning signs were there: his increasing secrecy, his dismissal of transparency practices, his focus on short-term financial gains over long-term sustainability goals. I should have addressed these concerns directly, rather than hoping they would resolve themselves through better communication. Documentation and evidence gathering are essential protective strategies that every founder should implement from day one. My ability to defend against Dave's takeover attempt depended entirely on having detailed records of conversations, decisions, and equity transactions. Without careful documentation of his systematic sabotage and my actual ownership stake, his polished presentation to the board might have succeeded in removing me from leadership of my own company. Pattern recognition becomes crucial as companies grow and power dynamics become more complex. Toxic behavior often starts subtly with small boundary violations and gradually escalates to more serious threats. Dave's initial suggestions about streamlining decision-making and operational efficiency seemed reasonable until I understood they were part of a systematic effort to isolate me from business operations and undermine my authority with clients and staff. For entrepreneurs facing workplace injustice or corporate betrayal, my first advice is to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. If longtime colleagues suddenly become secretive or dismissive, if you're being excluded from meetings and decisions you've always been part of, if someone is questioning your competence in areas where you've previously been respected, these are red flags that require immediate attention and documentation. Build and maintain relationships with trusted advisors outside your company who can provide objective perspective during crises. My attorney's analysis of our corporate documents was crucial for understanding my actual legal position, while Dr. Rodriguez and Janet Morrison provided emotional support and business guidance that helped me navigate the most challenging period of my career. Isolation is a weapon that toxic colleagues use to weaken your position, so maintaining external relationships becomes a crucial defensive strategy. Document everything, especially during periods of conflict or uncertainty. Keep detailed records of conversations, decisions, email communications, and changes to your responsibilities or authority. Print and save important documents before your access might be restricted. Maintain timeline records of significant events and policy changes. This documentation becomes essential evidence if legal action becomes necessary, and it also helps you understand patterns of behavior that might not be obvious in individual incidents. Understand your company's legal and financial structure completely, including equity arrangements, voting procedures, and governance policies. Many founders delegate these details to business partners or attorneys, but maintaining personal understanding of these structures is crucial for protecting your interests. Review corporate documents regularly, especially after funding rounds or significant policy changes, to ensure you understand your actual position and authority within the organization. The entrepreneurial journey is filled with people who will test your resolve and try to take advantage of your trust. Some will present themselves as partners while secretly working to undermine your success. Others will use corporate language and procedures to disguise their attempts to steal what you've built. Your response to these challenges will define not only your career, but also the culture and values of the organization you're creating. Speaking up for yourself isn't career suicide, it's career preservation. Allowing others to diminish your authority, steal your credit, or push you out of leadership roles destroys your professional future far more effectively than any confrontation could. Fighting back requires courage and strategy, but the alternative is watching someone else take control of your life's work while you remain silent and complicit in your own destruction. Good companies and ethical leaders do exist, and they recognize the value of founders who are willing to defend their vision and protect their teams. The clients, investors, and employees who matter will respect your willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult or risky. The people who criticize you for defending yourself were never truly supportive of your success anyway. Your career belongs to you, and no one has the right to take it away through deception, manipulation, or corporate politics. The skills and vision that allowed you to build a company from nothing are the same qualities that will help you defend it against anyone who tries to steal it. Trust yourself, document everything, seek wise counsel, and never let anyone convince you that you don't deserve to control what you've created. If you've experienced workplace betrayal or corporate backstabbing, please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help other entrepreneurs recognize warning signs or find courage to defend their own companies. Subscribe to join a community of founders who understand that business success requires both innovation and the willingness to fight for what you've built. Together, we can create an entrepreneurial environment where trust and collaboration thrive while protecting ourselves against those who would exploit our dedication and hard work. My next video will explore the legal strategies that saved my company and the specific warning signs that could help you identify corporate sabotage before it threatens your business. Until then, remember that your vision matters, your work has value, and you have every right to maintain control of what you've created. BioCycle Innovations continues to grow and innovate because I refuse to let someone else steal my life's work, and you can do the same when faced with similar challenges in your own entrepreneurial journey.